Watch this.
The way the law right now is unconstitutional. It stifles free speech. It stifles academic freedom.
That's why the ACLU wants to get rid of the No Public Funds for Abortion Act, or at least they want to get it changed to protect professors.
Profits before people is the big pharma business as usual approach.
Well, here's something both sides can agree on. A two-prong approach to paring down the prices of prescription drugs, which would hopefully mean more money and fewer problems for you. For one of the tribes native to the Northwest, today was a pivotal day in their historic relationship with the U.S. government. We're taking a look back at the Battle of Big Hole and what it meant for Chief Joseph. For decades, Idaho had crimes written in its codes that would usually go unpunished, and they usually had to do with what went on in your bedroom. For example, fornication between two unmarried people was illegal in Idaho. Had been since 1921. Adultery could get you 3 years in prison or a fine of $1,000. That law was passed in 1905. Sodomy, the infamous crime against nature, that was illegal since before Idaho was even a state. You may notice I'm using past tense to describe these laws. That's because they were considered antiquated, some of them unconstitutional and very rarely enforced. And last year, Idaho's legislature rewrote the code to get rid of them, which is kind of how the ACLU is looking at the No Public Funds for Abortion Act when it comes to what college professors can talk about in class. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday and how they filed a lawsuit to stop it from being enforced. The law has been in place since 2021, and up to now, no professors have been prosecuted for promoting or advocating for abortion. But the ACLU's view, if no one would accuse a teacher for violating the law the way it is written, then why is it necessary to have it at all? Here's Andrew Bartline.
A 2021 law is set to be tested, the No Public Funds for Abortion Act. Supporters say the law ties the same string to all public dollars.
No taxpayer money would be used to promote, provide, or counsel in favor of abortion procedures.
And no one is exempt, including colleges and faculty.
So yes, folks have been reaching out to us on this particular issue.
Leo Morales is the ACLU of Idaho executive director.
And we have challenged it in court. At this point, professors fear prosecution, fear being put in jail simply for doing their job.
The lawsuit names 6 professors individually. They say ethics classes can only look at one side of the abortion debate, and literature classes can no longer read essays explaining the ethical dilemma of being an abortion provider.
So we have a major issue with this particular law of targeting only one side of the debate as opposed to both sides.
So like content neutrality.
Absolutely. This particular law is problematic in that it censors and it punishes professors for actually looking at both sides of the debate.
But ask who wrote this law.
Yep.
Blaine Canzati.
This is overblown.
And he says that's not true at all.
Academic discussion taking place in the classroom on topics related to abortion and various perspectives on abortion is allowed under the law.
At least it has been so far.
Has anyone been prosecuted for this that is faculty at a university yet?
Mm-hmm. We hope not, but the threat is real.
What leads you to believe that somebody could be prosecuted for this if it hasn't happened yet?
Before filing this lawsuit, the ACLU sent letters to prosecutors whether they were going to enforce this law or not. We didn't hear a response.
A couple of the professors are saying exactly what you said, content neutrality. I want to teach something in a neutral academic way. But then the question you ask the prosecutors is present ideas that favor or promote abortion. That language doesn't seem the same to me between the letter you ask the prosecutors and then the examples that you have in your complaint.
Well, we were hoping that prosecutors would affirm, right, that the way the law is written right now is unconstitutional and affirmatively say, look, it doesn't make sense for us to actually prosecute based on this law that's flawed.
And you didn't get that?
We did not get that.
Who responded to you?
No one responded to us.
The ACLU isn't just looking for an exemption, they're asking for an injunction, permanently.
This law, as written, should have never been on the books, and we hope that the court agrees with us.
Well, this law as written could have been amended last legislative session. Here's a look at that proposed language. Specifically, it says, quote, to the term promote, I should say, shall not be interpreted as preventing, and we should have a graphic we could throw up for you guys now. And if we don't have that, my apologies. Brian, here it is. To promote shall not be interpreted as preventing any classroom discussion on the subject of abortion at a school, college, or university. So that language of promote, that's something we touched on yesterday. But
right.
Brian, a big reason we came back to this today was because that letter to prosecutors not affirming that they won't prosecute this, the language is inconsistent. It says, will you promise us that you're not going to prosecute faculty for promoting abortion in class? But then all the complaints in their lawsuit are about neutral content in classroom discussion about ethics. Those two are not the exact same thing. We didn't really get an exact answer on it, but we do know exactly what they want out of the lawsuit.
I would imagine, too, prosecutors may be a little reluctant to kind of show their hand on whether or not they're going to prosecute somebody based on a law that's on Idaho's books, especially if they're not getting that direction from the top attorney in the state.
And it might be a case-by-case basis as well. You'd have to see the specific case to know.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. All right, how many of you take prescription drugs? Statistically, more than 131 million Americans, which makes up about 66% of adults. 30% of Americans, though, report not taking their medicine, well, because it costs too much. Joe Paris joins me now. He spoke with a national group that is advocating right now for, well, a new law that sponsors say would cut down on prices. We've heard this before many times, but they say they're going to cut it down in a big way.
And the problem right now, Brian, that we're going to touch on is this, there's a lot of different ideas on this topic. We hear from you in email, text, voicemails that it is a very tough topic. And we see viewer comments from time to time, too. Insulin prices, for example, is a huge in the conversation of affordable medicine. And when insulin prices saw a big drop after major congressional pressure earlier this year, we saw comments like this. Hashtag the 208, they write. I knew a gentle single father years ago. Full-time job, no company health insurance. He sold pot on the side to afford his son's insulin. Unfortunately, his son passed at 21. Diabetic coma. This is so long overdue. And while insulin prices are still a conversation, what about other drugs that are just too expensive and important for Idahoans to afford? There's a national effort to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable for what critics call unfair practices. Now they have legislation and some congressional support, but there are a lot of ideas out there. New independent health polling shows that close to 30% of Americans say it is difficult to afford the cost of their prescription medicine. On top of that, 31% of those surveyed say they haven't taken their medicine as prescribed because of the cost. The same survey, done by KFF, found that about 8 in 10 people across political parties say that drug company profits are a major contributing factor to prescription drug costs.
1 in 4 Americans state that they have financial difficulty affording a prescribed medication. That's a crisis.
John Conradi is part of the team pushing for new legislation in Congress, the Affordable Prescriptions for Patients Act of 2023. So, what does it do?
To lower prescription drug prices by focusing on the root of the problem, and that's the egregious practices of big pharma.
The new KFF poll shows that close to 75% think that there is not as much regulation as there should be when it comes to limiting the price of prescription drugs. Conradi and the team at the Campaign for Sustainable Drug Pricing point to a particular pharmaceutical practice to extend the exclusive patent.
They often engage in a practice called product hopping or the patent dance, where just as that product is about to face generic or biosimilar competition for the first time, they make a teeny tweak in that drug, sometimes just changing the pill casing or pill color or the method of delivery to the patient, changing from a pill to an injectable or vice versa, and then patent that new product to extend exclusivity, extend monopoly on that product, and be able to keep charging patients high prices and blocking access to more affordable options.
The legislation does have support from major Republicans and Democrats in Washington. The challenge these days are competing ideas on how to take on the problem. We reached out to our Idaho Senate leaders, but they haven't responded just yet. We wanted to know what their thoughts were on the idea. We do know that Idaho Senator Mike Crapo is passionate on the topic. He spoke in Twin Falls this week about a different strategy to bring drug prices down by focusing on pharmacy benefit managers, third-party administration of prescription plans. They're accused of pushing prices because of a lack of accountability.
For years in empowering pharmacists to benefit patients to the full extent of their scope of practice, improving access for working families and seniors across the state, including in our rural areas.
And Senator Crapo adds that some of the most life-saving medications are out of reach for working families and seniors in Idaho. He adds that he believes the act that he's in support of will help change incentives that drive preferences for higher-priced medicines and also prevent expensive pricing in Medicaid programs, among other things. To be very clear, Mr. Crapo, I should say, Senator Crapo's approach is very different than the Campaign for Sustainable Prescription Pricing. And Brian, as we talked about just a minute ago, this highlights a major problem with a lot of different ideas on how to fix it. For example, the Campaign for Sustainable Prescription Pricing, they're looking at pharmaceutical companies, and those companies will say, well, you know, we make these legitimate changes, that's why we refile the patent. So depends on the case-by-case situation, but yes, drug prices are very high. We see text messages and calls all the time. There's 1,000 different ways to attack the problem. The real trick here is figuring out one that everyone can agree on.
What's this, 2023? We've been talking about prescription prices since at least the 80s, but I can remember.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the immigration issue. There's never really a clean, clear-cut solution that people can just go, that's it right there.
And that's why things like this go on.
Or they follow through with it, yeah.
Or there's big ideas and they don't get followed through. And I will say on the prescription prices thing, the Eli Lilly situation with insulin earlier this year, back in March, there was so much congressional and public pressure put on this company to make sure that insulin's affordable so people aren't dying, that it made a big change.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes when there's, you know, so many different efforts at the same time, it can be difficult to see which one will win through.
All right. Thanks, Joe. We'll keep track and see if that goes further. Thank you very much. I remember back in May, we reminded you of a scuffle that broke out between private security guard and a protester at the Boise Pride Festival, which happened in September. You may remember, Boise police had to come break up that fight, and they also gave the private security guard a citation for battery. Well, that security guard, Chuck Radorf, was found not guilty for battery back in May. So he responded with some bad news for the city and Boise PD. He filed a tort claim against both of them for negligence. And today that tort claim was officially filed as a lawsuit against the city and BPD. Radorf's attorney says the city has to respond to the lawsuit within 21 days. And we'll see how that moves forward from there as well. Bullets flying, a battle over beer, and banned books. We got the rest of what you need to know on the 411. Maybe you have some 411 to share with us, or maybe just a question we might be able to help answer. Tell us what you think of the 208 and what we're talking about today. Text it to us to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. Don't forget your name and the hashtag the 208. The clean, the concise, and the clever ones could get some consideration at the end of the show, so stick around. If it feels like there's been a lot of kind of unfortunate news reported recently, well, you're right. We've had multiple car crashes, wildfires, a lot of shootings. Too many, probably. Well, there was another police shooting this morning. This one involved Garden City officers. The good news, no one was hurt in this one. And this one leads off today's edition of the 411. Here's Morgan Romero.
We don't go to work every day thinking they're going to happen or wanting them to happen, but sometimes they do. Garden City police took one man into custody after a report of shots being fired from a house on Stoneham Drive this morning. When 2 officers showed up, they say they heard more gunshots, with several coming out of the home in their direction. 2 men were inside. Police did shoot back, but no one was hurt. They got the men out of the house and took one to jail. More on the back and forth between a TikTok personality and a University of Idaho professor because of false accusations over the killing of 4 University of Idaho students. A federal judge dismissed the TikToker Ashley Gouillard's countersuit against Professor Rebecca Schofield. Back before Brian Koberger was charged with the murders, Gouillard accused Schofield of being involved in the murders on her TikTok, which then went viral. Schofield filed a defamation lawsuit back in December against Gouillard for the false statements. Then, Gouillard filed counterclaims against the professor. Those are the ones that just got dismissed. Schofield's defamation lawsuit against Gouillard is still pending. It's coming to a head in the world of beer. 2 people and a couple of breweries from Washington are suing Idaho over our distribution law. They say it's unconstitutional Idaho doesn't allow out-of-staters to sell their beer directly to retailers. Idaho code allows smaller in-state brewers to get a wholesale license so they can. They want brewers outside Idaho to have the same access. Remember when the Nampa School Board voted to remove 22 books from district libraries forever? Well, that sparked the start of the Boise Banned Book Club. They meet once a month to discuss not just the books, but how they can create a kind, inclusive, and diverse community.
The result is a really cool business, partnership, and a cool vending machine.
And now, you can find those banned books in a vending machine at Loose Screw Beer Company in Meridian. So grab a brew and a banned book and have yourself an afternoon. Read responsibly, and that's the 411 on the 208.
Well, it's been a pretty typical can we call it mid-August, early-ish August right now? Pretty typical afternoon for Boise. We jumped up to 93 degrees, but this happened early in the day, about 2 to 3 o'clock. We hit those low 90s, and then we've dipped back down now into the upper 80s. If you've been keeping track, Boiseans, that breaks a 5-day streak of highs just in those 80s, low to mid to upper 80s. Mountain Home hit 92, but Caldwell, you're still in the 80s right now. In the mountains, we saw mid 70s for McCall and Stanley. We've also been seeing some storm clouds gathering over Payette Lake. A couple of light sprinkles popping up in the west central mountains. I don't think this will amount to a whole lot, but still, if you are hanging out in Long Valley or maybe headed there in the next little bit, I do think there'll be a little bit of precipitation possible there. We've seen some clouds gathering over Boise as well. That's why our temperatures have taken a little bit of a nosedive down to 88, and we have some northwest winds that have set in as well. Courtesy of a weak disturbance that is moving by to our north. You see the clouds that have developed over the central mountains, also along the Idaho-Nevada border. Little blips of green you see here are those very light rain showers. It looks like Ontario, you might be getting just a sprinkle right now. Twin Falls, you might see or hear a rumble of thunder down south along the Idaho-Nevada border. In the Treasure Valley, though, we have some cloud cover now. That should all clear out overnight as that disturbance moves through. Temperatures in Boise will dip down into those low 60s tomorrow morning, and then we have another unseasonably cool day coming our way. 89 the high for Boise tomorrow, 90 for Ontario. We'll call it mid 70s for McCall and Stanley for Thursday afternoon with abundant sunshine across the region. Will be a little breezy tomorrow, so bear that in mind for your outdoor activities. Come Friday, though, we calm down, stay clear and dry, and start heating up. In fact, over the weekend, mid 90s. By the time the kids go back to school next week, mid to upper 90s, flirting with 100.
Although he wasn't originally from here and didn't spend a whole lot of time here, he called the Nimipu, or the Nez Perce territory in Oregon, home. The legacy of Chief Joseph will forever be linked to Idaho for what happened during the summer of 1877. The beginning of the Nez Perce War in Idaho that year can be traced back to what his father told him. Quote, "When you go into council with the white man, always remember your country. Do not give it away," end quote. But ultimately, Chief Joseph would give it away because he didn't believe land was more valuable than blood. The Northwest tribes had been agreeing to treaties with the U.S. government for years up to this point. However, they were always one-sided and they were rarely enforced. Well, there were always more white settlers and miners moving into their territory, so there was nothing they could do about it. So by the spring of 1877, the renegotiated treaty some of the tribe's chiefs signed in 1863, that was all but abandoned. That May, the request made by the military to move Chief Joseph's band off their land in eastern Oregon became non-negotiable, which eventually led to what happened on this day, August 9th, 146 years ago. May 1877. Chief Joseph and his Nimipu people were given an ultimatum by General Oliver Otis Howard. They would have 30 days to move from their Wallowa homeland in Oregon to the Lapwai Reservation in Idaho, or the Army would move them by force. Chief Joseph opted to avoid violence and led some 800 Nez Perce, mostly women and children, and thousands of their animals eastward. But instead of stopping in Lapwai, he intended to make it to Montana, through the Lolo Pass, over the Bitterroot Mountains, hoping to hide out in buffalo country until emotions calmed. However, what was supposed to be a peaceful pilgrimage didn't stay that way. A skirmish with the U.S. Army near Whitebird on June 17th began the Nez Perce War. It continued near the Clearwater River on July 11th, and after crossing into Montana, still pursued by more than 2,000 soldiers, the Nez Perce camped in a mountain meadow along the Big Hole River. Then, in the early morning hours of August 9th, the Nez Perce were awoken by gunshots, a surprise attack from the U.S. Army. By the next day, nearly 90 Nez Perce were dead, 50 of them women and children. Chief Joseph and the rest of his tribe managed to escape. But the Battle of Big Hole was a turning point in the Nez Perce War, one that would last another 2 months and cover another 1,000 miles. Well, the battle for Big Hole was a turning point because it was the heaviest losses the Nez Perce had suffered during this entire, trail of retreat. Chief Joseph would lead his people back into Idaho, over the Bannock Pass, then back into Montana, seeking refuge in Yellowstone. They then set out for Canada, and they came close. On October 5th, 1877, 40 miles from the Canadian border, Chief Joseph surrendered to the U.S. Army after a 5-day battle. It's when he famously said, "It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." He surrendered with the promise he and his people would be returned to Lapway, another promise that went unkept. Some did escape to Canada, but the rest were instead sent to Indian Territory in Oklahoma, and they wouldn't make it back to the Northwest until 1885. All right, let's get right to your comments about the abortion law, or the No Funds, Public Funds for Abortion Act that we talked about earlier today. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, you got to love the talk to text. It was supposed to go back to the states to allow the citizens to vote on it, and that's what should happen in Idaho and anywhere else. Well, it went back to the states, but it was your legislators that voted on it, and they had a trigger law in place since 2020. If we regulate what pharma can change, some will suggest we're stifling innovation. If the government subsidizes, drug costs via higher taxes, others will say we're supporting socialism. Exactly. David summoning it up best, I think, from Boise. I'm sitting here yelling at Senator Crapo. He voted against lowering the price of insulin. His pants must be on fire. That is true, Rhonda. In 2022, he voted against that capping insulin costs and the infamous or Inflation Reduction Act. That's what it was. That's what I'm trying to say. What color is your nail polish, Rachel? Deep burgundy. Now you know.